Here's a question for you, and it might actually keep you up at night. Is the United States Constitution the American dream, or is it the American nightmare?
That is quite a way to start a conversation. A little bit of drama for a legal discussion.
I can't take all the credit. It's the big question from one of the lecture slides we're looking at, but it really stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It does.
We usually think of the Constitution as this, sacred document. It's the bedrock. It's the thing under glass at the National Archives.
Sure.
But when you really dig into the sources we have today, you realize it's a lot more complicated and honestly a lot more mysterious than what we learned in civics class.
It certainly is.
Mm.
We are looking at a really fascinating stack of materials. We've got the foundational documents themselves, the actual text of the Bill of Rights, the history there. But we're pairing that with this very deep, almost philosophical review by Kermit Roosevelt III.
And he's reviewing a book by the famous legal scholar Lawrence Tribe called The Invisible Constitution.
Yes, the Invisible Constitution.
That sounds like a conspiracy thriller. Or, the plot of a...
A National Treasure movie.
Mhm.
I was thinking the same thing. They find a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. But it's actually a very serious legal argument. The premise is that the parchment, the ink, the words "we the people," that's all just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. And to really understand how American liberty works, you have to look at what Tribe calls the dark matter holding it all together.
So that's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and map this invisible world. We need to understand what this dark matter is, how judges find it, and this is the big one, whether it's actually safe to rely on laws that aren't written down.
Which sounds a little risky.
It does to me. But before we get to the invisible, we have to start with what we can actually see.
Right. The visible Constitution.
Yeah.
We need to ground ourselves in the text first.
Okay, so we have these slide decks on the Bill of Rights, and the context here seems just vital. It's 1791, the Founding Fathers are in a room, and the vibe is tense.
Oh, very tense. They're not just patting each other on the back. They're sweating
And why?
because they're terrified. You have to remember, they had just fought a bloody war to escape a monarchy. The whole conflict was about the role of government versus the individual.
Okay.
They knew they needed a central government to function as a country, but the fear was that this new government would become a leviathan,
Yeah.
an all-powerful beast that would just crush the little guy.
So just like the British Crown, they'd just escaped.
Exactly. So the Bill of Rights wasn't just a list of nice-to-haves. It was a shield. It was a containment strategy.
I see.
If you look at those first 10 amendments, they are essentially a list of thou shalt nots aimed right at the government. They define a zone of liberty that the state just cannot cross.
Right, let's look at the big ones. Amendment 1. You can't tell people who to worship or what to say.
Amendment 2.
Mm.
You can't stop people from owning weapons. Or, as slides point out, maintaining a militia.
Amendment 3. You can't just shove soldiers into people's houses.
And that third amendment, it almost never comes up in court these days.
I would imagine not. We don't have a lot of quartering of troops happening in the suburbs.
No. But it shows you how specific their trauma was. They were reacting to abuses they had physically suffered.
Mm.
But beyond just the list, the slides highlight the big structural principles.
Separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism.
Right. The machinery.
And this machinery, it's all about sharing power. Big states versus small states, federal versus local. The whole system is designed to be inefficient, isn't it?
In a way, yes. It creates friction. The theory of the visible constitution is that if power is hard to use, it's harder to abuse.
So you write down the rules, you write down the limits, you ratify it, and that is the law. If it isn't in the text, it isn't constitutional.
And for a lot of people, that's where the story ends. Textualism. Just read the document.
If it's not on the page, it doesn't exist. But this is where we pivot. Because according to Lawrence Tribe and the review by Roosevelt, if you only look at the text, you are missing the glue.
You're missing the invisible constitution. This is Tribe's core thesis. He argues there's an unwritten constitution that exists right alongside the written one.
And he doesn't just say, it's a vibe, right? Or the spirit of the law.
No, he uses a very logical argument to prove it must exist. He calls it the argument from necessity.
Okay, I want to drill down on this because it feels so counterintuitive. If we have a written contract, why do we need unwritten rules?
Well, think about how you read. Tribe asks a very simple question. Does the Constitution say, read this document in English, from left to right and top to bottom?
Well, of course not. That's just how reading works.
But that's an interpretive rule. We don't read it diagonally. We don't read every third word. We follow a set of instructions that are not in the text.
Okay, but that feels like basic literacy. Does that really count as constitutional law?
It's the most basic layer. But Tribe goes further. He imagines what would happen if we tried to fix this. Say we pass an amendment that says, in construing this Constitution, the reader must be confined to the enacted text.
A rule that says only follow the written rules.
But that rule itself is text. You have to interpret that rule. How do you read it? Left to right, in English. It creates a logical loop. It's self-refuting.
You can't step outside your own eyes to see yourself.
Exactly. You always need an outside, invisible framework to understand the inside text.
That's surprisingly deep for a legal argument. It's almost metaphysical.
It is. However, Roosevelt, in his review, he has a critique of this. He seems to think Tribe is being a little dramatic with the branding.
How so?
Roosevelt points out that, we don't usually call it an invisible book just because we need rules to read. We don't talk about the invisible Moby Dick.
Fair point.
He suggests Tribe is using the name Invisible Constitution to make these interpretive habits sound, well, more authoritative than they might be.
Okay. But Tribe isn't just talking about grammar, is he? He's talking about actual laws that govern our lives but aren't in the text.
Yes. The big example in the source material is one person, one vote.
Right. The argument from consensus.
If you look at the text of the Constitution, especially historically, there's nothing that says legislative districts have to have the same number of people.
In fact, the U.S. Senate is the opposite of that. Wyoming gets the same number of senators as California.
A massive population difference.
Yeah.
But if you asked the vast majority of Americans today, or any judge, is one person, one vote the law? They'll say yes.
So it's law because we all agree it's law.
That's Tribe's argument. It has hardened into part of the invisible Constitution.
That sounds democratic, but also a little slippery. Roosevelt points out this works great when we all agree. If it's uncontested, it's invisible law. But what happens when people disagree?
And that's the core of the problem. If the invisible Constitution is just consensus, it breaks down exactly when we need it most, when we are fighting about something.
Okay, so we'll get to the dangerous side of this, things like torture, a bit later. But first, how do judges find these rules? They don't just pluck them from thin air, do they?
Tribe lays out a toolkit. He has these 6 modes of construction, and he gives them these very visual, scientific-sounding names.
Geometric, geological, gravitational. It sounds like physics for lawyers.
Tribe does love his metaphors.
No, huh?
But they are useful for visualizing how this legal logic actually works.
So let's start with the geometric mode, connecting the dots.
Think of the Constitution like a star chart. You have individual stars, so specific provisions in the text. The First Amendment is a star. The Due Process Clause is another.
Okay.
The geometric mode is when you draw a line between those stars to form a constellation, a shape that wasn't explicitly drawn but is clearly implied by the arrangement.
Give me a concrete example. How does drawing lines create new law?
Okay, so take all the different limits on government power scattered through the text. Limits on seizing property, limits on arrests, limits on speech regulation. If you connect them, you start to see a broader picture.
A bigger principle.
A principle that says, ours is a government of laws, not men. Now that phrase, which is foundational to American law, is not in the text, but the geometry of the text creates it.
So you're stepping back and looking at the architecture, not just the bricks.
Precisely. You're seeing the design intent. Next is the geological mode. This one is about digging.
Digging for what?
For the bedrock, the presuppositions. The idea is that certain rights must exist underground for the rights on the surface to make any sense at all.
And the classic example here is Poe v. Ullman.
Right. This was a case about a ban on contraceptives. Now, the Fourth Amendment says the government can't conduct unreasonable searches of your home, but it doesn't say you have a right to use birth control.
So the government's argument was, we won't search your house without a warrant, but we can still make it illegal to use contraceptives inside it.
Exactly. And the geological argument asks why. Why do we even have the Fourth Amendment? It's to keep the government out of our private business.
Right.
So if the government can ban you from using contraceptives in your own bedroom, even if they can't search for them, the protection is meaningless. It's an absurdity.
It's like having a lock on your door but no walls.
That's a perfect way to put it. So the geological mode digs down and says, the bedrock here must be a right to privacy. The search warrant is just the surface protection. The privacy is the real foundation.
Wow. And that is a huge one because the right to privacy is the basis for so many modern controversies, and people always argue it's not in the Constitution.
But according to this mode, it's the bedrock under the Constitution.
Okay, what's next? The gravitational mode.
Tribe calls this the anti-slippery slope mode. It's about how one law can shape the entire legal space around it.
Like mass and physics.
The example used is United States v. Lopez. This was a case about banning guns near schools. Congress tried to do it by claiming it affected interstate commerce.
Which, I mean, that feels like a real stretch. A kid bringing a gun to school isn't shipping cargo.
It is a stretch. And the gravitational argument asks, if we accept this mass, if we say commerce means guns near schools, how does that warp the rest of the legal universe?
It would mean Congress could regulate literally anything just by calling it commerce?
Exactly. It would create a black hole of illimitable national authority. So the invisible Constitution exerts a gravitational force that says, no, we cannot go there.
Because it would collapse the whole system.
It's a structural check.
Yeah.
It basically says some interpretations are just too heavy, they break the orbit of the law.
That is such a cool way to visualize it. It's not just what do the words say, it's what does this decision do to the structural integrity of the galaxy.
It's compelling. But then we get to the mode that causes the most fights.
Oh boy, the global mode, the international lens.
This is the idea that we can look at other nations' laws to help understand our own. Tribe argues this is just looking for wisdom. If another democracy has solved a problem, why not look at their homework?
But as the source material notes, this is a major culture war battlefield.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention John McGinnis calling it chic for the elites and Robert Bork calling it toxic anti-Americanism.
It gets heated fast.
The critique, which Roosevelt touches on, is about relativism. The argument against it is that the U.S. Constitution is supposed to rely on our community standards. Take cruel and unusual punishment.
Right, the Eighth Amendment. If we're deciding if a punishment is cruel, does it matter what France thinks? Or does it matter what Americans think is cruel?
That's the argument. Roosevelt suggests that if the Constitution is about we the people of the United States, then looking at we the world could be a mistake. We might want a different standard based on our own unique values.
That makes sense. We're not governed by the UN Charter. We're governed by the U.S. Constitution.
Right, and then there are two other modes mentioned briefly, geodesic and gyroscopic.
Geodesic is like the framework, right? Things like Miranda warnings. The Constitution doesn't say you have the right to remain silent, but it's a structure built to protect the right against self-incrimination.
And gyroscopic is about stability, keeping the ship of state upright. The best example there is secession.
I want to save that secession point for the very end because it is a mind blower. But before that, we have to talk about the danger here. I mean, the hosting me is excited about this invisible world. It's creative, it's deep. But the skeptic in me is thinking, isn't this dangerous? If it's invisible, can't a judge just make up whatever they want?
And that is what Roosevelt calls the problem of contested substance. It's easy to see an invisible constitution when we're all talking about one person, one vote. We all agree.
But what about torture?
This was the example that really stood out in the readings. Because this isn't abstract. This was real policy.
It was.
You people on the left arguing that the invisible constitution bans torture because it's an affront to American values.
They're making a geological argument that human dignity is part of the invisible bedrock, even if the word isn't in the text.
Exactly. But then you have people on the right, specifically the Bush-era Office of Legal Counsel, arguing that the invisible constitution gives the president, as commander-in-chief, the power to override laws that ban torture.
They're using a structural, a geometric argument about the unitary executive theory.
So both sides are using the invisible constitution. One side uses it to ban torture, the other uses it to allow it.
That is terrifying. It means the invisible constitution can just be a mirror. You look into it and you see what you want to see.
Precisely. And that's Roosevelt's big warning. When the law is invisible, there are fewer constraints. It becomes a weapon that can be used by anyone to impose views that aren't in the text.
So if it's this double-edged sword, is the answer just to stick to the text? Should we go back to being strict originalists?
You would think so. That's the argument. But Roosevelt concludes that the distinction between visible and invisible isn't actually as sharp as we think. You can't just go back to the text.
Why not? The text is right there.
Because the text is full of holes. Look at the Ninth Amendment. It literally says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
So it's a text that says the text isn't everything.
Exactly. It is a textual bridge to the invisible. And think about phrases like equal protection or due process. Those are just words on a page. We used to think equal protection allowed for segregated schools. Then, in 1954, we decided it didn't.
The text didn't change. We did.
We did. So whether it's visible or invisible, it all comes down to human interpretation. The visible Constitution isn't a rigid cage, and the invisible one isn't just pure fantasy. They both require us to decide what kind of country we want to be.
Which brings us right back to the start. We went from the parchment, the fear of kings, the rules about soldiers and muskets, all the way to these gravitational forces in geometric shapes.
And what we've learned is that the Constitution is a mix of ink and consensus. The ink matters, but the consensus, what we all collectively agree to live by, is what gives it life.
Which means that you, listening right now, you are actually part of the Constitution. It's not just for judges in robes. Your beliefs, your votes, the consensus you help form, that's the dark matter.
It's a heavy responsibility.
Yeah.
If the invisible law relies on what the people believe, then the people have to believe in something.
I want to leave everyone with that final provocation we hinted at earlier, the gyroscopic mode. This is the ultimate example of the invisible trumping the visible.
Yes, the gyroscope that keeps the system stable.
So if you read the Constitution, is there a clause that says a state cannot leave the Union?
No. There is no anti-secession clause in the text. In fact, before 1860, many people argued that since states voluntarily joined, they could voluntarily leave.
It was a valid legal theory based on the visible text, and yet we know that it is unconstitutional for a state to secede today.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court wouldn't even need to hear the case.
We know it because of the Civil War.
Exactly. It wasn't written in ink in 1787. It was written in blood in the 1860s. That rule is absolute, maybe the most absolute rule we have, and it is completely invisible in the text.
Which raises a haunting question.
Is the strongest part of our Constitution the part that isn't written down at all?
Something to think about the next time you see a flag waving. Thanks for diving deep with us.
A pleasure as always.